And we're live.
Hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for watching our panel discussion on creating resilience for challenging opportunities. This one is about all the stuff that's in your food lurking in there that you may not know about. GMOs, pesticides, herbicides, and fungicides. Please feel free to participate. Write in with your questions, which we'll get to as many as we can. We love having that participation. This panel has Rachel Parent, Diana Reeves, Rio, and Paige Parsons-Roach, with Dorit moderating, being the moderator. Next week, we have Why Creating Non-Toxic Homes is Key, which is so exciting for us. And then we're going to have Language as a Tool for Healing What Hurts. The following week, When Silence Heals. So stay tuned for all these great panel discussions.
Wonderful. So thank you, Vanessa. And to our audience, thank you so much for joining us. We're so happy to have you here. I am excited about this panel because this is one of those things that I wake up with in the morning. I think about all day and I go to bed at night. And all I can think of is GMOs, pesticides, herbicides, and fungicides, because it bothers me. And it bothers me particularly in the vegan communities because for some reason, I do not know why we do not pay much attention to that. And I think it's critical. Mm-hmm. It is really, to me, the difference between health, wellness, and illness and sickness. And this includes mental illness as well. So I am so thrilled to have our audience here with us. And first, we'll start with Diana because she is the founder and CEO of GMO Free USA. And to her, I give a standing applause. Diana, take it away.
Thank you, Dorit, for inviting me to be part of this very important discussion in your webinar series. I'm the volunteer executive director of GMO Free USA, a 501c3 nonprofit. In my other life, I was a CPA. Losing my first child to cancer after a significant Roundup exposure early in the pregnancy and my family's autoimmune problems led me down a new path. It started in 2012 with the battle to label GM foods, because if you don't know what you're eating, you can't figure out what's making you sick, right? When labeling legislation failed, we stepped up our efforts to educate and bring consumer-driven change to our broken food system. We have overwhelming evidence showing why now, more than ever, it's critical that we're healthy and resilient. People with underlying chronic health problems are at increased risk of losing their lives during this pandemic. There is what I believe to be overwhelming scientific evidence linking long-term consumption of many GM foods to chronic health problems like allergies, immune system disturbances, liver and kidney disease, reproductive and digestive problems, obesity, diabetes, and more. Genetic engineering comes with off-target and unintended side effects. This includes the new technologies like gene editing and CRISPR, which are touted as precise and safe. But while the news is full of GMO fairy tales, study after study tells us that nothing could be further from the truth. What have GM foods done for us? We have foods like corn that now have pesticide in the plant DNA. You can't wash it off. If the corn were on the shelf at Home Depot, it would be labeled with an EPA pesticide registration number. That's scary. We have food plants that don't die when directly sprayed with toxic herbicides. So when the weeds become resistant, they just add more herbicides, like the corn created to be sprayed with 5 different herbicides currently up for approval. It's horrifying. Let's face it, we will never win the war against nature. And there is the general issue of spraying crops like grains and beans with toxic herbicides just before harvest to dry the crop down. The system is broken. We subsidize GMO commodity farmers that pump poisons into our food and environment, but no subsidies for organic farmers who grow real food. Instead, we charge them extra fees for organic certification. We sure can't count on legislation to protect us. When you can't legislate, you educate and litigate. We've now filed 5 consumer protection lawsuits, and there will be more. We sue for change, not for financial settlements. The lawsuits are intended to stop misleading or deceptive marketing practices and to bring behind-the-scenes change to our broken food system. While we do see some progress, one of my greatest fears is that we ban one toxic chemical and replace it with another that is equally or more toxic. We're playing a game we call whack-a-mole with the chemical industry, and it has to stop. Are we going to put our trust in medical professionals who advise us to avoid GMOs and eat organic, or corporations that tell us not to worry, it's all safe?
Thank you. Thank you very much. So the next person we're calling on after Dana is Paige. Paige, would you please send us your voice?
Yes. Can you hear me? Okay, great. I'm Paige
Yes.
Parsons Roach. I'm a mother of 2 grown children, 21 and 19. I also am the booker and a producer for Jane Velez Mitchell's Jane Unchained News, which is a global network raising awareness for the environment, animals, food justice, and human rights as well. Many of us grew up drinking cow's milk because we didn't know better. But now we do. I'm going to be talking today about milk, dairy, and eggs that are full of GMOs and pesticides because of the crops that they're eating, which is the most inefficient way to eat your food, rather than going straight to the organic, non-GMO fruits and vegetables, nuts and grains and legumes. 65% of the global population suffers from dairy allergies, sensitivities, and lactose intolerance. Are you a baby cow? Research has also linked dairy consumption to an increased risk of cancer, diabetes, osteoporosis, heart disease, and more. I'm reading this straight from switchforgood.org, which is an incredible organization that will educate you about the benefits of switching for good to a plant-based milk source. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so very much, Paige. I am really glad that you are going that angle because a lot of people think that when we talk about GMOs or herbicides, pesticides, or fungicides, that we do not include the egg and the dairy industry, which is really important. So, Rachel, as soon as you unmic your phone, your audio, you will be on next. Rachel Parent from Canada.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rachel Parent. I'm a youth climate and food activist from Toronto, Canada. And I've been working on this for over 10 years now. I'm sure everyone on the panel has been working much longer, but it is a journey in our food system. And I think there is so much to learn that we're not told, that we're not being shown. My journey personally started off with the right to gain mandatory GMO labeling. And it's grown into seeing just how far the corruption in our food system has gone, to the point where, while food is supposed to be our medicine, it is now becoming our poison. It is the reason people are getting sick. It is the reason that over 40% of US citizens have chronic health conditions. And those are only the citizens that are aware of their health conditions. Especially during times of COVID right now, we have to be looking after our health. We have to be making sure that we are building up our immunity, taking care of our bodies. And it seems like, while that has been part of the shift towards community gardening and growing a garden in your own yard and finding out where your food has come from during this pandemic, on the other hand, we have seen such a spike in junk food sales in things like Kellogg's, as well as Kraft Dinner. All these massive corporations are benefiting off of making people sick during a time where we have to be taking care of ourselves. Genetic engineering is really disrupting the balance that we call an ecosystem. It is disrupting our bodies. It is disrupting nature. We after all are connected to nature. And the problem with genetic engineering is there's no saying how far this will go. We have new technologies like gene editing that are coming out every single day that our governments and regulatory agencies don't even understand. And yet somehow foods like these that are not regulated, that are not going through proper testing, are reaching our shelves. So that's what I hope to talk about today.
I am so glad you spoke about everything you spoke about too. And actually you're talking about gardening, growing our own food, which takes us to the queen of it, who decided not just to grow her own food, but Rio, if you would unmic yourself, we'll bring you on. She actually created her own farm.
Thank you. My name is Rio. I'm the author of a book called Hooked on Raw. I'm very interested in the raw and living food diet and lifestyle. The book has 350 recipes in all categories, and it also has 130 pages as to why you would make some of these changes. as I was writing the book, I became aware of the genetic engineering of food. So there is a chapter in there on the genetic engineering of food as it was 20 years ago. And I have to say, nothing much has changed, and it's even got worse at this time. Most people don't know what the genetic engineering of food involves. We are very aware of the chemical model of pollution. We understand when chemicals pollute our atmosphere, our bodies. We understand the radiation model of pollution. But most of us do not understand that there's a biological model of pollution. And that's where genetic engineering of foods comes in. The industry scientists that are working on this will tell us that, oh, this is just the new advance in food production. It's no different from what farmers have done thousands of years ago. But I beg to differ on that, because farmers, many thousands of years ago, the original farmers, they would, let's say, see a plant that had qualities that they liked. So they would save the seed from that plant so that they could recreate those qualities that they liked. Then maybe those farmers saw that this plant had a certain quality and that plant had a certain quality, and they were in the same family. So they would bring those two plants together, kind of like a date, and just put them in the vicinity and let nature take its course. Sometimes nature would take its course, and a new plant would develop that had the characteristics of both plants. But with genetic engineering, it doesn't give the plants the autonomy that they need. Plants are living organisms, and they have a life of their own. They make decisions as to how they will live and grow and produce and their evolution. They have a say in their own evolution. Genetic engineering is the interruption of the evolution of natural plants, because in genetic engineering, you don't bring two plants together and let them do their thing. You force the genetic engineering into the DNA of the plant. You force the DNA particle into the chromosome of the plant. And how do you do this? Well, there's several ways. One way, see, the industry scientists will tell us they very precisely place the DNA that they want into the plant, and they know where it's going to land. Well, that is not true, because how they do it in plants is they piggyback the DNA onto an agrobacterium. In animals, they use viruses where they piggyback the DNA. So first of all, you're taking the DNA characteristic that you want. And that DNA is really just a space in the chromosome chain. It's just a space. And what it does, you have to find the one that does what you want it to do. So the most prevalent combination that they're doing now is they're genetically engineering a trait that creates plants that will resist pesticides. And it's not just the current pesticides. They've got a lot of pesticides that they're trying to get in and have been defeated. The Center for Food Safety has helped defeat a lot of the different pesticides that they have tried to get plants to be genetically engineered against. So what happens with a plant that you're genetically engineering for resistance to, let's say, a specific pesticide like glyphosate? What happens is they cut the DNA that will create that. They piggyback, they call it a cassetic genet. They piggyback it on an agrobacterium, and that agrobacterium knows how to get into the cell. They don't know how to get into the cell, but the bacterium knows how to get into the cell. So when it lands in the cell, where does it go? It can go anywhere. So because they say they're doing it precisely, but they don't. And this is why they create allergens, unexpected toxins, different things. But let me get back to the genetic cassette. There's another thing that's layered into this genetic cassette, and it's called a promoter. So let me give you an example of what a promoter is. Let's say I, Rio, fall down and bruise myself. So a molecule goes down into the chromosome and tries to find the gene that encodes for the protein that I need to make new skin cells. So that promoter tells the cell, Rio needs skin. So it starts making the skin that I need, sends it up to my skin. Now, once I have enough skin and my wound has healed over, the promoter turns off the skin producing mechanism. Well, in genetic engineering, it would take years for them to find the correct promoter to put in for that particular creation that they're creating. So they use something called the cauliflower mosaic virus, which is a promoter. But that particular promoter, it doesn't turn off ever. So now you've got a genetic cassette that has the agrobacterium, the DNA that you're piggybacking on it, and it also has the cauliflower mosaic virus, which tells the DNA to turn on. Then there's a few other little things that take place, but I'm going to shorten this. So the next thing they do is they put in an antibiotic resistance marker gene. And the reason they put that in is they want to know in their little petri dish which plant is the genetically engineered plant. So since they've got an antibiotic resistant marker gene in there, any plant that doesn't have that will die. So the plant that survives, that's the genetically engineered plant. Now, I had said before that you don't need to know a lot about genetic engineering to know that this is not right. This is an interruption of the evolution of life. And I can say a lot more about it, but I'll cut it short there, and hopefully I can talk more about it later in the program.
Thank you, Rio. So I did say at the beginning that Diana Reeves, as the head and the founder of GMO Free USA, is the queen of GMOs. Well, if Diana's the queen, I must tell you Rio is the empress. And she started long ago, because I remember doing a book tour. I was in New York City, and Rio invited me to be on her radio show. And what she dedicated at that time, her radio show to, was to stopping Monsanto and all the other companies that had just started up with it. And we could still have probably stopped them at that point. But what really shocked me was that very few people was interested. When I did workshops, and I was doing a lot of workshops at the time, both promoting my book and my recipe book, and just teaching people how to go vegan and to be raw, every time I mentioned GMOs, people just tuned out. They didn't want to know about it, and I was shocked. So I was really amazed at how dedicated Rio was. And then I remember that when she decided, this is it, I'm moving out of New York City, I'm going to start my own farm, I thought, oh no, she's given up. She realizes we can't fight those big corporations because not enough people are involved. What I'm hoping is that, but she did not give up. She's still doing it. Only we have more people. We have Diana Reeves now. We have Rachel up in Canada. We've got Paige is going to be telling us more today. We've got so many people now that are involved, and I'm so happy to have Rio on here because she was the first person who I found was really dedicating her life to stopping this. And I can't imagine what it is for her to see that GMOs are no longer just applied to food. But I would like the panel to talk about the fact that it's now in cotton. Anybody who's wearing cotton today, or mosquitoes, eucalyptus trees. So Diana, would you like to speak more about all the different ways, please, in which GMOs is now affecting our lives, not just in the food supply? And you need to unmic yourself first.
Thank you, Dory. So it's very worrying what's going on. Right now in the Florida Keys, there's a company called Oxitec, and we've been working with locals down there and some other organizations as well to try and stop them from doing an experimental release of genetically engineered mosquitoes. And there is enough data to show that the mosquitoes don't accomplish what they set out to do. They've been previously released in the Cayman Islands and also in Brazil. And the objective is to reduce mosquito populations and thus mosquito-borne illness. But there was a team of scientists from Yale that actually went down and analyzed the experiment in Brazil. And what they found was really frightening. And, it comes down to you really can't fool Mother Nature. So at the end of the 18-month trial, they found that the mosquitoes, which were supposed to, basically die and reduce the population by spreading, this death gene, more or less, they found that those mosquitoes had actually interbred with the wild population, and some of the mosquito genes were in the wild population. So the concern was those genetically engineered mosquitoes actually contain genes from several different mosquito species. And so now, by spreading genes from several different mosquito species into the wild population of Aedes aegypti mosquitoes, the concern is that the population is now actually stronger and better able to spread disease. And by that 18-month mark, the wild mosquitoes stopped breeding with the genetically engineered mosquitoes because they had some natural mechanism of avoidance, and they just figured out not to do it. And then the scariest thing was that the population rebounded, and there were actually more mosquitoes at the end of the experiment than there were in the population at the start. And so, somehow, money talks, and there's so much manipulation going on, in the world of lobbying and, corporate control of our food and now our environment. So they are actually in the process of gaining approval. And the Florida Keys Mosquito Control District is where the last approval needs to come from. The EPA actually rubber stamped the mosquito trial after rejecting it. But under the current administration, the EPA, department that was responsible was basically replaced with friendly people. And so after the EPA issued their rubber stamp, the Florida Keys Mosquito Control Board points to the EPA and says, well, the EPA looked at it, so it's safe. But the EPA didn't do a thorough review of the potential, off-target and, other consequences to the environment and to human health, because these mosquitoes are actually raised in tetracycline. And if you speak to physicians in the Keys, they'll tell you that they are deeply concerned that the mosquitoes have the ability to spread, believe it or not, antibiotic-resistant bacteria to the population. And that would be tragic, especially in the context of being in the midst of a pandemic. So that's one example, and there are others. There was an attempt to release genetically engineered moths in New York to reduce the moth population. I think it was cabbage moths. And that was approved, but then it ended up not going ahead, which we can be grateful for. And then, as you say, cotton, I think it's something we should be very conscious of because of the environmental impacts. And, as far as the way cotton is grown, not only does it contain pesticides that it expresses so that when an insect, tries to consume the plant, their stomachs rupture and explode, and it kills the insects. And so that's a bad thing for the insect population. Generally speaking, the insects are going to evolve and have, resistance. But also it's, sprayed with multiple pesticides now. So dicamba, which is very volatile, was in the last round of cotton that was approved. And the drift from the GM crops that were dicamba tolerant, including the cotton, and soy as well, actually is responsible for many millions of damage to real food crops that are in neighboring areas, because it's just so volatile it can't be contained. So I think, being conscious of what we wear, to the extent that we're able to, find environmentally friendly and healthier ways, of producing fabrics and things that, we put on our bodies is not only going to benefit our health, but also the environment.
Phew. Thank you. So for those
that wasn't too much, I know.
No. This is exactly what this is about. So thank you.
One of the things that's coming up in the Florida Keys in the month of August is what's supposed to be the final public meeting. And we are trying to connect with individuals who live in the Keys so that we can, educate them and get them more involved with what's going on, because we need to really grow the number of people that testifies at these public hearings, in terms of, the local participation. And the problem is most of the people are unaware of what's going on when they don't understand, all of the nuances of, the risks to human health as well as the environment. They just think, oh yeah, it's going to reduce the mosquito population. What a great idea without pesticides. But the other part of the truth is they're not going to reduce the spraying of any pesticides. They're going to release the mosquitoes and nothing else will change. So, and plus they're not going to tell them tell the population, the locals, where exactly the mosquitoes will be released or when. It's all a secret. So you kind of have to ask yourself, there's no transparency. What are they trying to hide?
This is really important to know. This is the kind of information which I think so many people are ignorant of and have no idea if this is so or not. Yeah, it's really critical. Vanessa, do you have any comments or anything to add before we go to the page?
Yes, I do. I first wanted to thank Jonathan for watching and sending us hearts. We appreciate you, Jonathan, always. I wanted to point out I'm wearing organic cotton. Now, I have about 6 years ago, I made a vow to only buy organic cotton, hemp, linen, things that are grown without pesticides, given that even organic products, your food, not so much cotton, I don't think, but definitely food still have pesticides. They're just natural pesticides that are allowed. We know that, as my mother used to say when I was a kid, nightshade is natural. So natural doesn't necessarily mean it's good for you. It could be a poison. So some of our food does have organic pesticides that are questionable in terms of their health benefits. I think it's still important that we go in that direction, encouraging organic farming, because that is something that's going to help not only all the workers in terms of their exposure and help our food sources and our soils and all the microorganisms, insects, birds, everybody who is living on the land. It's pushing us more in that direction of cleaner food. And I definitely think everyone should grow their own. But I was doing a little bit of research this morning, and I just wanted to say that I was looking at the difference between pesticide-free and organic. And apparently in organic, you are not allowed to use sewage sludge in your food, which means everything else can use sewage sludge. Just want to leave you with that thought, because it's rather dramatic to me, and I did not know that, and I was very disturbed.
So, as we all wear our sewage sludge today, I'd like to actually call on Paige to add her voice here, because there's so much that's going on that we're not aware of. And before we even go to Paige, I'd like to remind people that it's not just what you're wearing, it's the cotton sheets, your cotton towels. We're wiping our bodies with this. So Paige, would you please come on board?
Yes, I feel like, so what you said about this, the sewage sludge, I don't know if a lot of people know this, but when you talk about, I'm gonna head it back to the food again, in the sense that that sewage sludge then goes into the soil. That's pretty obvious, but there are a lot of slaughterhouses that are nearby where these sewers are. So the byproducts of these slaughterhouses are going into the sewage system as well, and it's a huge melting pot of just disgustingness if you think about it. And there's also the manure that's used. I've heard as well that with the organic, it's very, very minimally sanctioned. Not a lot of checks and balances when it comes to the soil these days. There's a lot of getting by. So it's very essential that you're looking. So I wanted to actually bring up soy. I don't know if anybody else was going to bring that up, because it's in so many of our products. And the safest way to eat your soy is a non-GMO, organic, sprouted, make it yourself, or there is one called Wildwood, and a shout out to Wildwood. So I do want to make that known that you need to be careful to read your labels, do your research before you go out shopping. And also, I know so many people have heard that really the skin, the vegetables that have the skin exposed, that's one of those very basics, but that you definitely need to go with an organic non-GMO if you can find it. Now, it's the labeling, that's the problem, right? We don't get the labeling. Circling back to dairy, I'm going to just circle back right now. The USDA is reviewing. What they do is they come up with the guidelines every 5 years. And today it was announced that we have until August 14th to sign for plant-based milk to be brought forward into the USDA guidelines, which we would want that plant-based milk to be a non-GMO organic plant-based milk as well. But again, I'm going to circle back to Switch for Good. They have a petition by which you can sign. So I know a lot of people, maybe they're listening out there, what can I do? Well, purchasing with your dollar what you buy, if you vote with your dollars, and doing your own research and listening to the experts that many on this panel, what they have to say, because when you have the knowledge, you feel empowered. It's not about being disempowered. It's not about hiding out and being, it's about gaining information and being empowered in your lives to make the choices that are healthy for you, your children, and the future of our planet as well.
Thanks for reminding us that other than just freaking out, we need to also focus on the solutions. And we definitely, towards the end of this, we're going to be going through the panel and asking what their solutions are. And you spoke about labeling, or lack of it thereof, which brings me back to Rachel in Canada, because that's how she first came to my attention.
Yeah, so I think there's huge issues with what we're seeing right now, and I'm blanking on the question just because
Labeling.
We have gone through a few. Labeling, yes. So I think labeling is obviously more important now than ever, and we've seen this lack of transparency within our food system for so long, and this continues. Right now, we have the genetically modified salmon that was approved for consumption and is being served in Canada in the service industry. And that means when you go for sushi, when you go for fish at your local restaurant, you could be eating genetically modified salmon. And this salmon was engineered to grow much faster, much more aggressive. If it ever ended up in nature, we could have a huge problem with losing all of our natural salmon or interbreeding or contamination. This is what we mean by it's larger than what we just have on our plate tonight. Problem is, there is no labeling. So how do people know whether they're eating genetically engineered salmon or regular salmon? And as a vegan myself, I also do want to talk about soy a little bit. I think that is incredibly important. I think one of the things the vegan movement has not looked at nearly enough is genetically modified foods, is chemicals, is things like glyphosate and Roundup. It's been shown that vegetarians and vegans have higher levels in their blood system of glyphosate, and that is because we're eating things like legumes, like chickpeas, lentils, things that are really incredibly important for us, but they are sprayed right before harvest with glyphosate to dry it out quicker. It's called crop desiccation. And that means that we are eating straight residues up to 3 times a day, every single day. On top of that, glyphosate is a registered antibiotic, which means that even if we don't think we're eating, antibiotics because we don't have meat in our diets or dairy, we could still be ingesting it with every single meal unknowingly. So basically every single day we are eating unprescribed, unsafe antibiotics. And without proper labeling of glyphosate, without proper labeling of genetically modified foods, there's no way of knowing what we are putting in our bodies. And that's what has to change. The reality is that every consumer, of course, has that right to know what's in our food. But when you have these massive lobbying organizations speaking on behalf of us, speaking on behalf of corporations, there is such a conflict of interest. And we've seen that. That's why I got into the movement when I saw Prop 37 and people, even like Diana Reeves, who inspires me so much. This is the reason that we need to fight, because if we don't have the right to know, we don't have the right to health. And that is the biggest thing that we all have to fight for. We all deserve health.
Oh, I love it. We don't have the right to know. We don't have the right to health. And this is why we must exercise our own authority over our own lives. With this is a perfect segue into Rio. Unmute yourself, please, Rio.
Thank you. Well, getting back to my little genetic cassette, I want to let you know that bacteria and viruses are not the only vectors that the industry uses to get these foreign genes into the target plant. They also use high velocity guns where they put all those things that I told you and more, and then they shoot it into the cell at high velocity. Well, what does this have the potential to do in the cell? They don't just do it once. They do it again and again and again until they get the result that they want. I have to say that life does resist it. So they have to do it a lot to get what they want. Another way that they do it is they make little electric holes in the cell so they can get what they want in there. And what this creates is something called mutagenic instability. So when the industry tells people, oh, we're going to create plants that the yield is superior to anything we're growing now. Well, in 30 years, this has not materialized because of this mutagenic instability. The yield for these genetically engineered plants is actually less than for conventional plants and for organic plants. Now, I want to point out to you that the companies that are interested in genetic engineering, promoting genetic engineering, what do they all have in common? They're all chemical companies. They're all pesticide companies. Monsanto, who was acquired by Bayer, Aventis, Dow Chemical, Syngenta, DuPont, they're all chemical companies. So what do they want to do with these genetically engineered crops that they're creating? It's not for the benefit of our health. It's for the benefit of their financial advancement.
Thank you, Rio. Thank you so much. You know, one of the things that can you mute yourself now, Rio? Thanks. One of the things that I want everyone to think about also and to remember, and I don't know if anybody on the panel can address this, is the effect on farmers. Can we, some of us, talk about what went on? There was a researcher from New Zealand who went to India at the beginning of all this and was studying how the farmers were responding there to the forced use of these of Roundup. And is there anybody who would like to talk about the massive amount of suicide with the farmers? Diana, would you like to speak about that? You'd have to unmic yourself first, though.
Yeah, yeah. So it's very, very tragic what's happened in India. The farmers basically get on like a pesticide treadmill, and the cost of the inputs increase because the soil gets depleted, and the built-in insecticide in their cotton plants no longer is effective, to keep the insects away. So they have to add insecticides to the mix of the chemicals that they're using on the crops. And they just can't afford it. They can't afford to stick with it. The seeds are expensive. They charge a premium because they're all patented. And so these poor farmers, who are poor to begin with, basically don't see any way out. And very, very sadly, many of them will drink Roundup and just commit suicide because they just can't handle it anymore. And, of course, Monsanto doesn't give a hoot. So, and the numbers have been absolutely massive. I couldn't give you a current number, but just enough to say that it's been a very large problem in India. Devastating.
Thank you, Diana. And I don't wish for this to go on without acknowledging Deborah Coons Garcia and her absolutely phenomenal critical film, The Future of Food, in which she highlighted so much of this. And I strongly recommend to everyone listening or watching to, if who has not done so, is to watch The Future of Food. I actually know her quite well and was going to invite her to be on this, but I wanted it to be a small group of people so we could hear from each person more. But we're going to be, when the end, Vanessa will announce that we're going to be starting a round table. I'm going to be inviting her to join us as well, because that film is critical for each and every person to watch. If you do not believe, or incredibly knowledgeable and so dedicated panel members today, please watch The Future of Food. So, Paige, would you like to add anything about this? And you have to unmute first, yes.
First of all, I'm devastated to hear that, because you think about the farm workers, and as somebody who's vegan for almost 5 years, I count on obviously the farmers, the vegetables and the fruits. I mean, meaning that I hope that where my money goes is paying for the health and wellness of the farmers and workers. And I know that there's been companies that have been called out for mistreatment and of farmers, which I've chosen out on, and I know many of us have. It's just devastating. So it brings me to the cow and the slaughterhouses there as well, in that the slaughterhouse workers, many of them, it's been reported, thousands are reportedly getting the virus, the pandemic, which it's now being in many countries. They're doing studies that are finding that reportedly that the COVID is winding up in the food source. So going from the person. There's also a numerous high population of alcoholics. Suicide rate is numerous, and spousal abuse in homes of workers that work in these slaughterhouses. And again, it circles back to the consumer, because if the consumer is buying, people are dying, animals are dying, and we keep this system in place. We need to have systematic shifts, and that is what Diana and Rachel and Rio and you, Dorit, and Vanessa and myself are all working for, is systematic change. And that requires individuals, their purchases, as well as lobbying. So one of the goals that I have this year, by the end of this year, is to put out ABCs, 1, 2, 3, simply put, how we can sign petitions, how we can get involved on a legislative level to make these kind of systematic changes that need to happen for us to have a planet. I grabbed one more thing I want to say is, we haven't even talked about the climate, the wreaking the havoc on the climate, but I grabbed this one, fight climate change with diet change. Also, Greta Thunberg, there's also a youth climate save group that has been started that's igniting the youth to make changes around the world when it comes to climate and food. And I really appreciate the information coming from each one of you, in a sense that the vegans need to be more informed, because if we're contributing to the problem of this systemic GMO problem, we need to make these shifts and changes in what we're purchasing and where we're purchasing from.
I agree wholeheartedly. And before we go to Vanessa with some comments, I would actually like to add to that. What I would like to see from this group is that we all come together. I just could not believe that Rio and Diana had not met each other ever. I was just shocked about that when I first, this years ago, I was telling Diana about Rio, and she had no idea who I was talking about. And I was just stunned. So I would love to see that this group come together. And I know Diana has a lot of initiatives that she has started that we could assist her with and help her with to really upgrade, not just upgrade, but amplify it and get it out to as many more people as possible. Vanessa, are you ready?
Yes, I sure am. I just had a couple of comments I wanted to make really quickly before I ask you all a quiz from David Wong, whom we always appreciate for watching. The first thing I wanted to address the farmers in India really quickly. I think one of the other levels of perniciousness of Monsanto, now owned by Bayer, has done is that they've claimed that the seeds have spread from the wind. And so they're claiming that the seeds of the farmers are owned by Monsanto because of wind transporting things, so that they don't own their own seeds. And that was another major cause of bankruptcy and financial failure for these farmers, on top of everything else. So I think we all need to be incredibly vigilant about the effect of large corporations, because big pharma and animal agriculture, all of these organizations are linking together, and their interests are not to protect us, but to grow profit, of course. So we have to be investigative and researching and finding out about so many of these different layers of corruption that take place. The other thing I wanted to say is, Paige, you brought up a point about vegans, if we're contributing to some of this. That's what I think is so powerful about veganism, because it's addressing so many different causes and concerned about humans, animals, the environment, agriculture. They're all linked. And when we're killing animals, the animals in turn are killing us and destroying the atmosphere and the dead zones and the sewage and the pesticides and, each getting into each other's water and air sources. It is all interconnected. And that's why I think that broad view needs to be maintained of looking at all different perspectives. Now I want to ask you all a question from David Wong. This is going to be whoever wants to answer this question. It's a quiz. What was the first GMO food approved for sale in the U.S.?
I'm going to give Diana, go for it.
It was the Flavor Saver tomato, which hit the market, but was actually removed. It didn't last. There was consumer rejection and some other concerns, and it was actually withdrawn from the market.
Do you want to talk about that also, Rio? Because I know you were so against that at the time. I remember only too well, but how much?
Well, you're saying what?
It had a flounder gene.
My partner's saying it had a flounder gene in it. I'm not sure because I don't recall right now.
I heard it from you.
He says he heard it.
Yes, yes, that was true, Rio. We actually talked about this when you were ready to.
I have to think back and listen.
Yeah, that was way back when, yes.
But what I did want to say, and I'm sorry I'm getting off what your question is, but I want to say, how did this all start that life itself can be patented? I mean, we can understand that you can patent an invention or some other kind of creation, of physical creation, but how is it that we are now allowing life itself to be patented? And this all started with a researcher that was working for General Electric back in the 1970s. And he created a bacterium which was able to break down oil spills. And so naturally that seemed like a good thing. We can take care of these terrible oil spills that we're having. But what happened with that bacterium ultimately is that it didn't only have an appetite for oil spills, but it had an appetite for other things too. So it was never released. But this Chakrabarti, who was the inventor, they took it up all the way to the Supreme Court to see whether life itself in the form of a bacterium could be patented. And so the first time it was rejected, and I think the second time, but then the third time, different people got in and different ideas came in, and there was a big push because our government looks upon genetic engineering as an industry that it wants to be at the forefront of. So they're pushing it as an industry, regardless of what the effects are on human health, environmental health, pollution, and etc. So I think we need to go back to the beginning and retract the patenting of life, because what gives anybody the right to patent life? And let me point out, a bacterium or a plant, it may have, like corn, I think has 35,000 genes, right? Humans only have maybe 19,000 genes. We think we're so advanced, but corn has more genes than we do. So let's say a corn has 35,000 genes, and a company like Monsanto Bayer comes along and changes 3 or 4 of those genes. Why do they have the right to patent that? Didn't creation itself put all those other thousands of genes in it? Doesn't creation itself have the right to? The other thing that I want to say is, as a farmer, when I'm out in my, I call it a garden because it's really a garden of Eden. So when I'm out in my garden, I see that, yes, there's the cultivated plants and the perennial plants that I put there, but there's other plants that nature puts there. And what gives a company the right with their glyphosate to kill everything except their patented plant? What gives them the right? Because every plant that exists has insects, butterflies, life that that comes around it. Those plants are important for some form of life. And what gives one company the right to destroy all that life and nature as we know it?
I told you she devoted her whole life to this. The woman is passionate. And this is exactly what we need, more like her, which is why I'm now bringing in Rachel. Rio, just turn off your mic, please, and we'll come back to you. Rachel, please go ahead.
I think there's so much to unpack with genetic engineering, and our current industrial food system is failing everyone. It's failing farmers. It's failing people who are using glyphosate and are getting cancer. We've seen that there's 125,000 cases now over non-Hodgkin's lymphoma with Roundup. And so it shows you that this food system is failing, and not only is it failing the farmers and our economy long term, not only is it failing our food security, it's starting to fail people, especially in communities of color. And we've seen this time and time again, where they're forced to eat foods that primarily contain genetically modified foods. And it's forcing people in areas where healthy food is not available to eat these foods because they're subsidized. So it's cheaper for corporations to make food with subsidized ingredients than it is to make food that is made with organic ingredients. And that is a fault of the system. We have made cheap food, in terms of quality, affordable. And instead, we should be making healthy food affordable so everyone has the opportunity to nourish their bodies. One of the things that touched me during this conversation was we were talking about the tragic loss of Indian farmers and the suicide that's happening. And I was in touch with an indigenous tribe in the Amazon when it was really burning. I'm not sure if you remember, but at the beginning of the year, there were massive issues with the Amazon burning down at such incredibly high rates. And they were telling me that majority of this is due to, obviously cutting down the land to grow genetically modified foods and for logging. But what the media and everyone else is not telling us was the fact that these big corporations like Cargill, like Bayer, Syngenta, they're going into these places and telling these tribes and these indigenous people that they have a solution, that they'll be able to offer them technologies, education, various instruments to better their lives. And they sign contracts without properly being able to read the language. And because of this, because these seeds are patented and they start growing these genetically modified seeds, the big corporations say, that's our property now. You have taken over, you have used our seed, and you didn't sign proper contracts. So legally, this land is no longer yours. And this continuously happens where there's land grabs time after time with people who are most vulnerable, but also with people who have been taking care of this land for decades, for millennia, since the beginning of time, have actually been respecting nature, versus many of us who have lost track and lost connection with nature. So it's really unfortunate to see that not only is our food a health issue, it is a human rights issue. It is an environmental issue. We know that 44 to 57% of all greenhouse gas emissions are coming from our food system, whether it be animal agriculture, growing genetically modified foods with herbicides such as glyphosate that are damaging the soil and releasing carbon into our atmosphere, the plastic packaging that comes from fossil fuel industries. It is all so deeply interconnected, and it is almost half of our greenhouse gas emissions. So if we're going to solve human rights issues, if we're going to solve our environmental crisis, we need to look at our food system urgently.
Absolutely, yes. And you went to India and studied with Dr. Vandana Shiva. Would you, for those of the audience who do not know who she is, would you please just give a brief introduction to who she is, please?
Absolutely. Vandana Shiva is an incredible warrior for food, for water, for ecosystems, for the rights of farmers, for the rights of citizens around the world. And she is based out of India. I really encourage everyone to look into her work. She has written so many incredible books that will give you an insight more into this movement and a deeper understanding of the tragedy that this is. And she focuses a lot on patented food. Vandana Shiva, for those who are wondering, is Vandana, and then Shiva is Shiva. And I think she's such an incredible resource. So please watch out for her, watch the documentaries, watch her books and read her books, because this is an incredible resource that we all need to utilize.
Yes, thank you so very much for this. I am so glad. I know that Diana needs to make a comment about the chelator that binds and removes essential minerals, and this is critical because almost every single disease starts from dehydration and the lack of essential minerals. So I'm bringing in Diana. And then afterwards we only have 1 minute to go to everyone, including you, Vanessa, for one comment. Thank you. Go ahead, please, Diana. On mute, on mute, on mute. Thank you.
I just want to say that actually there are 3 patents on glyphosate. The first patent was by Stouffer Chemical in the 80s, and they patented it as a chelator, and it was used to clean and descale commercial pipes and boilers because it binds to and removes minerals, which it does as well to us when it is consumed with our food, so that it's actually drawing out things that we need to be healthy from our bodies and from our food. So that is very worrying. And there were a couple other points I'd like to make, if that's okay. GMOs, it was mentioned, how the system is so broken, and what's going on with our trade partners now. It's not just being forced on Americans, but we're trying to actually force the things that are genetically engineered on trade partners who really don't want them. It's happening not only in Europe, but now the UK, which is on its own, as well as other countries, China. Like, we bully them. And that's basically how we keep our farmers in business, which is very troubling. And then I also wanted to add 2 other quick points. Why do we need the non-GMO project for verification when we can buy organic foods? The reason for that is the organic system isn't perfect. And while genetically modified seed can't be used to grow organics, the problem is there's little testing for contamination, which is like from pollen drift or from shared equipment or whatever as during processing. So in order to be sure that we're not including in our diet, unintended contamination of GMOs, we need to find not just the organic label, but also the non-GMO project verified in cases where it's high risk for contamination, such as corn or soy or canola or sugar, or also, believe it or not, I lost the thought. My brain just went.
Oil, canola oil.
Canola oil as well.
Canola oil.
Yeah. And so it is critical. Oh, potatoes, my gosh. Potatoes are now high risk for GMO. Most of the potato crops growing in the US are genetically engineered. And we were actually contacted by the scientist who was the primary developer of the potatoes because he was concerned that they weren't safe. And he actually bailed out on Simplot. He was a former Monsanto employee, and they've silenced him. So he wrote a book which has been, pulled, and there's more bullying going on there. And the last thing I wanted to mention is the Impossible Burger, because that actually contains ingredients that are created with synthetic biology, which is an extreme form of genetic engineering. And the product itself is contaminated with like 42 proteins, which are contaminants that arise during the genetic engineering process with the synthetic biology, that's used to create ingredients from soy, leg hemoglobin, which is, it's very complicated. But anyway, those contaminants are worrying. And while they say, oh, it's safe and they're rolling it out everywhere, we've actually done a health survey, and we think there's big cause for concern, because not only like a few people reported that they got very, very sick, but let's just say a substantial number of people reported problems, which primarily were digestive, including diarrhea, constipation, vomiting, projectile vomiting, a whole long list of things, but also other problems as well, like hormonal problems and gosh knows, weight gain and a whole ton of other stuff. So I just want everybody to know, because I know there are a lot of vegans, that that's really not a healthy option.
And this week, actually, I'm glad you spoke about the Impossible Burger, because Trader Joe's, to the delight of many vegans, announced they're going to be starting to sell the Impossible Burger. And I'm hoping that people will use this video to get the word out about this. So thanks for bringing that up, Diana. 1 minute from the rest of the panel. Paige?
Yes, I just wanted to point out that in a brochure that I have here, meat production accounts for 1/3 of all pesticide use. These pesticides are toxic to the workers, wildlife, and pollutants, which we talked about. Over 10,000 workers are hospitalized for acute pesticide poisoning every single year. And I also want to make a note about think grass-fed is better. Think again, the amount of water that it takes for an animal to become a product on your plate is wreaking havoc on our climate. It also talks about how, to make matters worse, the USDA Wildlife Services killed over 4 million animals, mostly at the request of ranchers. This includes predators like bears, endangered gray whales, ground squirrels, and birds, for the use of the animal to become a product for someone when there are so many options otherwise. I also want to point out a great, incredible guide called the African American Vegan Starter Guide. And the reason why I bring this up is because there are a lot of people who say the vegan space is white centric. And I found this to be a very powerful resource for my African American friends and resource for them as well. And I want to talk about the 10 high protein vegan foods. And I think it's very essential that we sort out what vegan foods are non-GMO. So I'm going to just mention a few here that are the 10 to look for that are that are high protein. The tempeh, the tofu we talked about, sprouted non-GMO organic, lentils, pumpkin seeds, almonds, split peas. Number 7 is garbanzo beans, hemp seeds, quinoa, and millet.
Thank you, Paige.
Thank you for joining us.
So we're going to be going to Rachel. Each person that has spoken, just turn off your mic, please, and everybody else on mic yourself. We're now going to Rachel, 1 minute, and then Rio will finish up, and then Vanessa.
We, in order to create a better future for all of us, for our environment, for our health, for workers, we need to make sure that we're changing the system. And we've proven that this system is not sustainable for anyone. We need to move towards a regenerative system that doesn't focus on chemical-intensive agriculture, that's not spraying our food with high levels of glyphosate. 300 million pounds of glyphosate are sprayed every single year in the United States. 300 million pounds are going into our bodies, into the soil, into our atmosphere, and this is extremely toxic substances. We need to move away from a food system that is poisoning our planet and ourselves, and to one that is regenerating both of those things. And that's why regenerative agriculture has such an incredible potential for producing more food, for making sure that we're able to feed the world in a sustainable way, balancing our water levels, being able to grab carbon from our atmosphere and bring it back to the soil where it belongs in order to mitigate climate change. The solutions are at our fingertips, but we now need to end the talking. Talking is really important, but we need action now more than ever. And we need to make sure that we are demanding that our government is no longer subsidizing this type of agriculture that is destroying any hope for a better food system.
And the Mexican government just took action. What did they do? Could you quickly just tell everyone?
They banned glyphosate, which is incredibly exciting.
Although it will be phased out.
Yes.
I believe until the year 2024. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, Rio, you are on. We have 1 minute, and then we need to close with Vanessa.
So I think what we need to do is move toward feeding ourselves. 100 years ago, we didn't use supermarkets that sold all foods. We had backyards. At the end of, during World War II, we had victory gardens, and we are quite capable of feeding ourselves and sharing food. So I think that's one thing that we can do, whether you live in an apartment and just have a little windowsill or a balcony or a backyard or a front yard, you can start small and start learning how to feed yourself somewhat. Another thing is divest from all companies that say life science, because life science companies may be genetically engineered companies, and you don't want to put your dollars where you don't want to have your dollars advance this kind of life-destroying technology. Another thing we can do is join groups that campaign supermarkets and different, like Trader Joe's and different markets, to remove the GE products from their stores. A while back, when Whole Foods wasn't owned by Amazon, it had promised that it was going to remove all GE, but then when Amazon bought it, that went by the wayside. I think what we need to do is realize that we, as a community of citizens, we have a lot of power with our buying dollars. So let's put our dollars where we want them to go. That would be with farmers markets, individual farmers that you know are growing the food the way you want it to be grown. Talk to your farmers in your community and see what they're doing. Not all farmers have to be organic or certified organic to be growing the right kind of food. So those are a few of my suggestions. And also I want to say, growing some of your own food, even if it's just a little bit, it's kind of fun to see that.
And you would know. Thank you so much. So before we go to Vanessa, this conversation continues both here at the Creating Resiliency site. Vanessa and I have more things in the pipeline, and also on my new show, which is starting on Sunday at 11 Pacific Standard Time on Elegantly Raw. So please join us there as well. And I am now going to bring in Vanessa.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I just wanted to respond lightning speed to some of the things people said, because so many great points, and we could of course go on forever, but these discussions will continue afterwards. We need to not mess with nature. The minute we start doing that, we're causing so many problems. Plants are great chemists. They know how to defend themselves when things are done properly. I've been to Ayurvedic plantations in India where they don't have any pesticides, natural, unnatural, whatever, because they're using plants to defend against the ones that are going to destroy what they're growing. So it's completely unnecessary. And if we're vegan and we grow plants and grains and beans, we don't need GMO, other than the fact that it's completely toxic and ruining the environment and our health. We don't need it. There's plenty of space for us to grow grains, and it's a much more efficient way of feeding the world than grazing a cow to be some humongous amount, using water, using resources, condemning a sentient being to a miserable life, and then killing her, producing so little food for all the grains and water that we've used. Grains is much more efficient, plants, fruit, all of that, to be able to feed the world. And I wanted to also say that growing yourself is such a great idea. Even if you're in a little apartment, you can get pots and grow kale so easily. It grows like a weed. So I definitely encourage you. I'm always going out in the garden and picking my kale and Swiss chard. Great way to do it. And then you know it's safe. And I always go to farmers markets and talk to my farmers. So I think that's a great idea. Last thing I wanted to say is that there's a vegan EFT called Vegan Climate, and great thing to invest in, that they invest in strictly eco, pure, clean, non-pharmaceutical, non-GMO companies. So that's something to check out. Last thing I wanted to point out that Rio is my guest on Lunch Break Live this Sunday at 12:30 Pacific time. So thrilled about that. And I'm on Dorit's show at 11. So very excited. And I just want to let you know about what's coming up that we have for our panels. Next week, we have Why Creating Non-Toxic Homes is Key. And that's going to have me and Dorit, also Will Tuttle and Ashley Greenwald. And that really is emphasizing all aspects of the toxicity in a home, both emotional, physical, environmental, all kinds of things. And we kind of touched on, Dorit was mentioning sheets, towels, our furniture, all kinds of toxins in our everyday lives. Then we're going to have language as a tool for healing what hurts coming up, and when silence heals. And we're thrilled about these topics because we don't always think about the words that we use in everyday language. And also when silence heals, there's a complicit aspect to not speaking up. So I hope you'll join us all for these panels every Wednesday. And then we're going to be having roundtable discussions starting in September, where we'll have a group of people who will all just talk with each other rather than the moderator asking specific questions. And so join us every Wednesday at noon Pacific time, 3 p.m. on the East Coast. We love your questions. We love all your participation. So thank you so much for watching, and we will see you next week.
And just so you know that both Vanessa's show and my show are on the Jane Unchained News Network. To this panel, my heart just beats with a big thank you so much. The conversation continues. This is not the end. I see you there, Paige. And please take to heart what we're saying here. Your life and your mental health depends on it. Thank you, Diana, for all the work you do so silently. And I'm going to do my best to connect this group and put us all together so we can support all the work of Diana and Rachel and Rio. And thank you many, many times over to the audience who actually were interested enough to find out about this topic today. Until next time, be well and stay GMO free.